Hello, everyone. I just wanted to start this week, as I will each week, with a brief overview of what the week will include. Week 1 and week 2 are combined, largely because one day of week 2 is a holiday. Therefore, the first week, what I want you to do is review all the course content and the syllabus and the guides and what the assignments are that are expected throughout the semester. And then you will move on to looking at the chapters in the book and the presentations in your learning management system. This week, we only have one chapter, and it is Chapter 1, The Science of Human Development. And like the first chapter in most textbooks that you will ever have, it is a very introductory chapter to what this course is all about. By the end of the week, the things that you should know are: why is science crucial for understanding how people develop? Are people the same always and everywhere, or is each person unique? How are the methods of science used to study development? And what must scientists do to make their conclusions valid and ethical? Let's begin. The science of human development seeks to understand why and how people change over time. We know that as we grow and we develop, that we don't always make progress at a specific speed, that everybody isn't on exactly the same time frame, and that there are some variances. But generally, we look at growth as multi-directional, multi-contextual, multicultural, multidisciplinary, and plastic. Let's cover one of those at a time. We know that change is multi-directional and that the study of the lifespan development highlights how people change over time and throughout their entire life. We know that there are critical periods and there are sensitive periods, and it's important that we know the difference in those. Critical periods are when something must occur to ensure normal development. And if it doesn't occur during that critical period, it will never occur. Your book gives you a prime example of fetal development between days 28 and 54, when babies start to develop arms and legs and fingers and toes. If they don't develop them during that critical period, they will never develop them. One of the stories you will often hear about in healthcare is of thalidomide. It was a drug they gave to pregnant women back in the late 50s and early 60s. Women that took this drug during that critical period frequently had babies that were born with birth defects, usually missing arms or legs or hands, or had deformities of those limbs. Now, this is an aside, but events like that are why the safety systems for clinical trials are in place and why the Food and Drug Administration so carefully reviews medications. They don't just take the word of the pharmaceutical company. And we've all heard that about this recently with COVID vaccines. It's important to understand there's a reason it took the US a little bit longer to approve the medication or the vaccine than it took other countries. And that is partially because of the system we put in place to make sure that no harm is caused by the medication. A sensitive period is a time when, if something doesn't happen, it makes it much harder for it to happen later. It doesn't mean it won't. And an example of that is language. Ideally, a child should develop its first language between 1 and 3 years old. If they don't, while this isn't critical, it may make it more difficult for them to fully develop language and to pronounce all words um, properly. So they may always have language deficits. Likewise, when people are fluent in multiple languages, it's much easier for them when they heard those languages in those first few years of life. Otherwise, the sounds that you make to pronounce specific words, you may never develop the skill set to pronounce those sounds. The next area is multi-contextual, and this basically is the perspective that humans develop in fundamentally contextual way. There are their development is impacted by their physical surroundings, their family structure, and their community um, characteristics. Some people would also say there is a social context because humans are intently social creatures. And there are people that thought that might be a fourth category here. Uh, and this category is impacted by decisions we may make and how those decisions impact us later on, or how the decisions impact us through our life. So some of those decisions may be choice and others may be involuntary, but they still have impacts on us and our development. This is also where we might consider the ecological system, which is a one way to think of this in context, and I'm going to discuss that in the next slide. The third way is multicultural. For social scientists, culture is the system of shared beliefs, conventions, norms, behaviors, expectations, and symbolic representations that persist over time and prescribe social rules of conduct. So it's a system of shared beliefs and conventions and behaviors that we may have. Each group of people creates a culture, and these may be based on an ethnic culture, national cultures, family, college, um, economics, and to some extent, families generally share cultures. But remember, for some people, if they grow up in a culture or they immigrate to the U.S. and then children are brought up in the U.S. school system and in the U.S. society, they may not fully share all of the culture, which can sometimes cause some differences. One of the things as nurses we need to recognize that's really important about culture is the concept of differences equals deficits error, which is the belief that if people aren't like us, then they are inferior or have a deficit. So if they're different, they have a deficit. There's nothing about that that is true, and it is something that we need to work on every day. And we need to be very aware of it as nurses because it can impact the way we provide care for our patients. I think we can take the opportunity to discuss this further in the Zoom office hour sessions. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to fully discuss and to understand. But I don't believe it's possible for it to be a one way conversation from me to you in an online environment. So I hope you will join me for the open Zoom sessions and that we can have more in depth conversations about your experiences and your understanding of culture and how it impacts your life and how you think it may impact the care that you provide. One point I do want to cover here is ethnic and racial groups. And I want to make sure that you all understand that both ethnic groups and racial groups are social constructs. These are these are defined terms and ways of categorizing people or groups that are made up by us as human beings. Um, Essentially, these are taught. Um, and somehow we have to develop a better way to discuss this topic. Again, this is something we will cover in the Zoom sessions. The fourth area is multidisciplinary, and this is biosocial, cognitive, and psychosocial. And each of the domain focuses on an academic discipline. So, biosocial includes biology, neuroscience, and medicine. Cognitive includes psychology, linguistics, and education. And psychology includes economics, sociology, and history. And typically, each of the scholars follow a specific thread or domain. This is one of the areas that you may find familiar in this section is discussions of genetics. And we'll discuss genetics further in chapter 3, but you will find a lot of multidisciplinary research doing genetic analysis. And the final area is plastic. And it really does kind of mean like plastic, like a bottle. But but they refer to plasticity because it has two complementary aspects. One is that it can be molded, and the second part is while it can be molded, then it kind of holds this permanent shape. The idea is that it is focused on both the hope that we can change and the realism uh, that we can continue to build on what already exists. So you now have 5 areas which we have discussed, and one of the things I reminded you of was that there were age ranges for different areas. And I wanted to make sure that you learn these age ranges. I would pretty much commit these to memory. And here's why. As you're reading textbooks or research articles, people will often refer to infancy, early childhood, adolescence, emerging adulthood. It really helps if you know just right off the top of your head what they're talking about and you don't have to go back and think about it. Because there really are milestones that you reach in each of these areas and things that you expect in each of these areas. And then finally, I wanted to take just a little bit of time to discuss the ecological system, which I find somewhat fascinating. So this is a way of looking at human development that has 3 nested systems. And the 3 nested systems are microsystems, exosystems, and macrosystems. And then the two affect, then this is all part of one chronosystem, which literally does mean time, which is the historical context. And the other is the Meso System, which consists of connections among the other systems. So if you look at this model and you start from the inside out and think about the human being and the developing person, you think about age, sex, health, abilities, and temperament, and then all the things that impact them. And just think of yourself in this context. The microsystem is the things that directly impact you, your family, your brother or your sister, your mom or your dad, aunts and uncles, your school, your neighborhood, your friends, and then potentially where you go to worship. Those people, that level then interacts with the exosystem. And the exosystem is really think of it as bigger community structures. So the entire educational system, the community structures, and think about this, community structures in a city are much different than community structures in a rural area. Medical institutions, again, very different depending on where you live. Transportation systems, shopping centers, mass media, and religious values. One easy way to compare these is to think of the difference between urban and rural communities. So, people that grew up in living in large cities versus people that grew up in rural communities. And then what you have in between those layers is something called a mesosystem. And that mesosystem is the area in which all of these things interact. And then finally, the outside system is a macro system. And it's cultural patterns, political philosophies, economic policies, and social conditions that exist. Whether or not people realize it at any given point in time, all of these things are interacting with who you are and how you're developed, and how you grow as a human being. Clearly, if you have parents that are highly educated, they value education, you live in a large city that puts a lot of money into the education system, that's going to have a much different influence on you than if your parents only graduated from high school and they don't have the same value for education because they have a working farm. And so hard work is more important to them than education, and you're in a rural community, and so you may not have the same level of access to foreign languages or to the sciences. That is going to have an impact on the way you develop. The same thing with your peer groups and friends, and with your neighborhoods and with your schools. Just remember that as you develop in your nursing career, one of the things you will do is you will take histories of your patients and you will ask them about their family history, their social history, their education. You will ask them about their religion. And when you're doing that, much of that is filling in this ecological model so that you understand all the pieces that interacted with that person. That is it for right now. I hope you will all take the time to join me for office hours. I have office hours again every Monday morning from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then again in the evening from 8 p.m. to 8:30 7:30 p.m. They are open office hours. Anybody can drop in. We can discuss any portion of the course content that is of interest to you. Remember that there is a quiz on Chapter 1. My recommendation is that you read the book first. You listen to this lecture and the other attached lecture on the scientific method, and then you take the quiz, which is timed. If you, for any reason, are having trouble with the quiz or you're not getting the grades that you hope to, please let me know, and we can work on quiz questions during office hours. Thank you.